Okay, we are back. I thought we could get it done in 2 recordings, but it looks like I'm going to need a little bit of time on a third recording. So we left off on this slide about monogenists, polygenists, and eugenics. So we will finish up by talking about eugenics and Sir Francis Galton. Sir Francis Galton believed that each race had a separate package of social and psychological traits transmitted through the bloodlines. For instance, he believed different races were more artistic, some were more smart, some were more criminal. Eugenics sought to control these traits by controlling the fertility of the population. This thinking led to nativism, which argued that immigrants were of a poorer stock than native-born Americans and should be excluded from entry into the United States. New immigrant groups were thought to pollute the existing culture and the bloodlines. And what we're talking about here, eugenics and Sir Francis Galton, this was at the beginning of the last century, so over 100 years ago, that they were thinking like this, but we can definitely still relate it to some ways that some people even think today. So the problem, though, is how do we distinguish race? What are racial boundaries? How do you decide who is what race? Hold on. So Omi and Wynant, and I'm getting here to your fourth quiz question. Omi and Wynant called racial formation the process by which social, economic, and political forces determine the content and importance of racial categories, and by which they in turn are shaped by racial meanings. According to Omi and Wynant, race is constantly formed, transformed, destroyed, and formed again. It is a central axis of social relations and stands on its own in that way. So the answer to your quiz question is this second bullet point here. Race is constantly formed, transformed, destroyed, and formed again. So in other words, what is race according to sociologists? I have to see what my next slide is. So what is race according to sociologists? For sociologists, race is a social phenomenon that seems natural but isn't. Race is a very real social distinction, but biologically, race is fluid and has changeable and unclear boundaries. How do we know when someone is a particular race? Here are some examples. If you look on the right-hand side, this black and white picture on the right, this is a picture of a Nazi, actually. The Nazis came up with a way that to try to racialize a group of people who were racially very much the same as everybody else in their culture. And so the Nazis tried to create sort of a biological way of delineating Jews from others. So the Nazis came up with this ratio where if you measure the ratio of the forehead to the nose size to the face length, supposedly if you come up with this certain ratio, you'll get a Jewish person. And of course this is preposterous, and it didn't work out. So this was problematic for them because how they were claiming that Jews, and I'm a Jew by the way, that Jews are a race, but they couldn't delineate a way biologically to distinguish Jewish people from everybody else. And so we can see the process of racial formation happening there. Again, it's the process by which social, economic, and political forces determine the content and importance of racial categories, and by which they in turn are shaped by racial meanings. So this is what happened with the Jews in Nazi Germany. They underwent a racialization process or racial formation process, where different social, economic, and political issues came together and were constructed to determine a racial category, but it had nothing to do with biology. We can see on the left-hand side, this picture on the left is a picture of 6 Muslim teenagers. And if you look carefully, you can see that according to our cultural standards, every single one of them is of a different race. However, there are forces in the United States who are attempting to racialize Muslims as a group. So race is constructed according to the interest of certain groups that wish to maintain power. Racial groupings are about domination and struggles for power. Race is another way that we organize our world. Knowing someone's race helps us to predict their behavior, supposedly, but racial groupings are the means for organizing inequality arbitrarily. So, what is the purpose of racial formation? Racial groupings are about domination and struggles for power. Racial categorizations also are organizing principles for social inequality. The creation of racial categories are a means of legitimating unequal treatment, exclusion, and harassment of certain groups. Racial groupings usually benefit the dominant group in some tangible way. So I am just going to tell you the answer to the 5th question. It asked the name of my best friend. Her name is Tammy, and that's the answer that you should give. Sometimes I talk about her when I talk about prejudice and discrimination, but I'm not going to tonight. So that's it. Thank you so much for staying with me, and I'll see you in the discussion boards.